Awesome. Once again, this is a great afternoon. Means I know we went everywhere around, I would say, and beyond. But I think we have to think about not just a single user perspective, but I think as we were talking, it's not just human centered, it is humanity centered. What we are going to do is not going to be just for the person who is going to buy our product. It's not just a small transaction between us and an user. I'm talking about wearing a company, a corporate hat, but how that's going to spill over, the consequences of it, good, bad, or otherwise, and how the society in large is affected by it, and how we can try to see how we can take care of ourselves. And I think if you look at some of the trends that came out, or trends or the observations, I would say, I should not say a trend in just 8 or 9 months. Humanity is tending to be a little bit more kinder. We saw that last year, a little bit more kinder, a little bit more helpful to their neighbors, to their relatives, trying to understand what circumstances we are in. Trying to make sure we take those, and the two call to actions that John was giving is like, what's holding you back? You are a creative minded person. You are a designer. You are a forward thinker. You might have a small budget, a big timeline, but will be the time. Literally, now is the time. This is the place for anybody to make sure they can really go to the kernel of innovation or imagination or curiosity and try to come up with some product or processes which is going to make people's life easier. Not everybody can have their own focus, bring some clarity. This is the crosshair. This is the community I want to serve. They have these problems, or I can see some opportunities over here. Let's go and solve them. The similar element can be used by corporates also. They might have a portfolio of products, but it's not just looking at the portfolio and the organic expansion of those. But if the ground below it has completely changed because of this pandemic, then it's sufficiently okay to retract back, create another portfolio or a body of work, which is now going to go and follow what people's anticipations, behaviors, habit change have been changing. So that was the first one. The second one was, I think what he said was the gift. I think we all know right now we are so lucky. Last year, just in USA, it was 100,000 people who perished because of COVID. We are lucky to be alive. Seriously, means a touch wood. We all are. And this is a gift. Every day is a gift. Every day, whatever we can bring in for ourselves or create something valuable for yourself, your family, your company, your community is always going to be helpful. So with that, I think we have, I can see Parrish over there patiently waiting, I would say, behind the curtains. Sir Parrish, you want to unhide yourself, unmute yourself. We will welcome you to the stage. Sir Parrish, you are here. I'm so happy.
Holy cow, that was far-reaching, that discussion. So tough follow-up.
No, it's John is awesome, and same like you, we all have different kind of, and I would say, insights and perceptions. And we were right now floating out in the universe, civilization, back and forth and beyond. But I'm now also really interested to see and go with you on the journey of this outdoor recreational kind of and different kind of a slice of life that you're experiencing, and you're willing to share that with us. So. Once again, thank you again for your time. I know everybody is so busy. There's so many things happening. We are trying to set up the strategy and cadence for the entire year. But thanks for jumping on the call.
Oh, my pleasure.
So before we go further, I think you have changed your roles in the recent years. Everybody knows you from your connected IT world. Then they also know you from your UX head of Ford mobility as such. But now you have embarked on a different, beautiful journey. Do you want to just give a little bit, let's say, about yourself and what this journey is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's interesting, just, the cycles you go through personally. It was interesting listening to John and the reflection. Personally, through my entire career, 25 to 30 years professional, right? Evolving a lot through different roles, a lot through different corporations, a lot through different verticals, a lot through different company types. So, building my own consulting company, working for IBM, working for international companies, being fortunate to travel, long distances, and just, I'm one of those guys that every couple of years kind of reflects and looks back in and takes note and says, okay, what have I learned from this experience? Is this what I want to continue to do? Is this where I want to put my attention? Is this what I care about? you know, and things shift constantly. So, and it's, you know, I think it's afforded by maybe the exposures we have, the diversity of the roles we have, the tools we have, capabilities like this, right? To have this kind of conversation, just what is today? Thursday. I'm losing track of days, but it's, you know, I think the world of possibilities is out there. And I think John kind of alluded to the things you want to do, the things you care about, maybe how you want to give back or how you see things evolving and how you can push that along, right? So I have a checkered past, yeah, in a handful of different corporations and verticals, from telecommunications to consumer electronics, deep into the web space. So in the early browser days, you know, and first transactional web systems and application development, and laptops and, you know, ATMs and lots of digital transformation in the product world. I have a product design, industrial design background, and then I have a master's in human computer interaction, all under the auspices of design. So I am a tried and true, I'll say, designer first. And I think actually most things should be subservient to that in the business world and corporate world and everything else. Because I believe so heavily in kind of communication and articulation and creativity and the power that that has, even over technology and over economics and over many things. Yeah, so, and, you know, I came to Michigan about 10 years ago, you know, after working through a couple of those verticals, and had a senior position at Ford, which was awesome global teams and lots of responsibility, and learned a lot. I mean, one thing that's critical to what I do and where I go is definitely constant learning and feeling of discomfort. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember, I think I went to my first interview at Ford and I didn't quite know what they meant by HMI. You know, I'd come from the HCI world and I was like, okay, are they talking about airplane pilots and ergonomics and this kind of stuff? You know, and then it was, so yeah, you just kind of roll with it, and, you know, and turn it into what you will. That was a great experience. And, you know, I left there maybe 3 years ago, and I firmly kept one foot in the mobility world and product design and kind of future automotive products and systems. And then I put my other foot into the outdoor space, recreation, outdoor adventure, and, you know, a lot of the things I think we're talking about here, whether it's just your connection to nature, your connection to the outdoors, and your connection to the sky, right, per John, and everything else. So it's been an interesting transition, and yeah, I'm happy to chat about it today. And I don't think, you know, I definitely don't have I don't have the right answers. It changes every week. It's completely network based. So it's who I meet and the conversations I have on almost like a quarterly basis lead to kind of a different path. But in some way, almost everything I try to do is connect, you know, all the petals of the flower, if you would, right, of my career and of my past, but then also of kind of these opportunistic
I like that analogy of
exploration.
flower.
Yeah,
That's pretty beautiful. It's a poetic kind of an analogy. I love that. I like that. Before we go, I know you have a couple of slides prepared for us, and we will go with that kind of a setting, and then we will go back with the Q&A. Before we go further, what do you do for fun, Parrish? Let people know about your own personality a little bit.
Oh, you know, so of course I love cars, you know, and getting into the industry, it was an interesting thing. I had avoided, coming from a product design and a very tactile, you know, visceral world of objects. I always avoided Yahoo, and I avoided Google and these companies that I didn't think were going to ever take product design seriously. And, you know, I was in a conversation at Motorola on a Thursday, and, you know, it was a big board, and everybody said, nobody will ever buy us. We're a family company. we've done all these things. And then, on Sunday, they were purchased by Google. And on Tuesday of that week, I think I was going for a stroll down a beach with my wife. And I said, oh man, here's what's going to happen. IP, jettison the hardware. And she said, why don't you just find a job in the auto space? You seem to really like automobiles a lot and that whole ecosystem, where it's going. And I said, can't do that. I said, you got to go to Art Center, CCS. I think, I said, I think there's just this tight community. I went home, and the next day the phone rang, and it was a recruiter from Ford, trying to track me down. But so that's been an interesting piece of it, just to drive 80, 90 cars a year and test drive things and be exposed to these different pieces in culture. Personally, I'm not a super outdoors guy. I'm a pretty avid mountain biker. I'm actually a water guy more than anything. So, so if I can be in water or around water, I try to swim almost as many days of the year as I can. I grew up on the East Coast, so I have a natural affinity to the Atlantic Ocean, and my family has a house in the Jersey Shore, South Jersey Shore, and we keep boats there, and we do a lot of fishing, and I've lived everywhere from and camped up in Acadia National Park and Nova Scotia down to Key West, right? And more or less every single town or beach I've seen or spent time on. So
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So water's big.
I think you and our next speaker, Pat, you have plenty of things in common with the water worlds that you are in. But that's amazing. Swimming. Do you, when I was born and brought up in India, I love swimming, but I used to also do lake and river swimming. Have you tried that? Because it's completely different than normal swimming.
It's not. I've not, not other than just, I live, 2 doors from a pretty good sized lake, and I'm fortunate to have a pool, which gets used a couple times, a couple months of the year, which is tragic. But no, I swim, I've done distance stuff in the ocean. And that's it. And I didn't, I was on swim teams, and then I discovered baseball and football's better than this. It was the grind of the swim. I do it all for physical fitness and some, reflection and yeah.
As fitness is the main thing also. As John was talking, health is the main part, but health and fitness go all in all together. Before we get you to share your screen, as you said right now about the pool getting seldomly used, just an element of trivia for all our audiences. Most people will have a jacuzzi in your house. When I say jacuzzi now, it can be a bathtub or a jet tub by any other manufacturer. Just as people, just take your guess in how much time, typically in average time, an American household uses that jacuzzi in a normal house. Just take a wild guess. You buy a house, there is a jacuzzi there, and in your lifetime in that house, how much times it gets used?
Oh yeah, it's really, really, really low, probably.
Anybody wants to pop in
40 hours in the lifetime.
The questions in the chat. I think maybe as the answers are coming, I can just give a shortcut answer. It is 7.
7.
This amount of investment you do, not just about money, but trying to find the right one and do all the layup and work and everything else. The average time it gets used is 7. So it's like, it's amazing things we do. And some things are coming pretty strong, especially now we are marooned in our work from home elements, where I'm also questioning the things that I have bought in my house. And like, how many times I have used it? Never. And it can go on with plenty of things. I'm not looking at just jacuzzi, but look at my ties. I had neckties, and now it's like never, ever again. So there's a completely different element to that. So coming back to you, Parrish, let's go down your prepared slides, and then we can open for questions.
Yeah, sounds good. It as I mentioned, I try to swim every day, and I sometimes calculate how much per lap I'm spending, it's costing me. It's I'm a pretty mechanical guy, and
you're classic.
Yeah, figuring out the business.
a classic mobility person. From my work to my place, how many times I stop at a traffic signal, how many days. I know people who literally log that every day. Like I buy a fast vehicle and then I go average of 34 miles per hour speed. Like, man, what's that? So anyway, it's fun.
Let me know if you can see my slides.
Yep.
All right. Do you see a collage of, I can't see myself.
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah. So, and so the boats and the fish, and that's kind of the happiness and the fun times up and down the coast. As I mentioned, I spend a lot of time with students these days, which is great. Whether it's with Savannah College of Art and Design and SCAD, and I've been involved in a class with University of Michigan for the last, as long as I've been here. So almost, 9 years on, it's an incubation class for new products and services. It scales the breadth of the colleges, actually. So it's Ross and Stamp School of Design and computer science and engineering and lots of others. And that's been great. We do things for seniors. We do a lot around COVID right now. Last couple of quarters, we do a lot about for kids' health. We do a lot about digital control. We now have funding that comes in from donors that goes to students, to take on their concepts. And we have a big show at the end of every quarter, and that's been great and rewarding. Our conversations, you're always mentioning cars. So I just threw out my most fun car, which is the Focus RS. And, but still having driven lots of things in my current ride, which is the Land Rover LR4. Like I said, I'm spending a lot of time outside. And one of the influences of my outdoor adventures is a house in Southern Jersey where we can actually drive on the island. So you can go anywhere in your vehicles, which is interesting. And then this Michigan Automotive and Mobility Group, we've been at this for about 2 years. It's kind of slowed down with COVID and all the webinars and great substance that's been out there. But that's a pretty thriving group of, 400 plus professionals with a guy named Mike Nunnery, and he and I oversee that with we now have committees and other groups contributing, which is great. I'm going to just cover a bunch of stuff, and I'm going to reserve the right to contradict myself and hit you guys with a fire hose of just thoughts. And I'm also going to talk about fire hoses attached to trucks. So I'll go at a fast click and, jump in anytime, honestly, GVAC, if you want to ask questions. Yeah. And I'm covering a gamut of stuff, and it's kind of hard to see how it connects, but these are the topics I'm going to talk about, including new business opportunities, new work, the world of mobility and the way it's seen today. I'm not a huge fan of these views. I like to think about it. I talk about, if you're born today or in the year 2030, this is what you might see, right? Just the scale of logistics and infrastructure and interoperability and investment and scaling and all these things, right? There's these romantic views. But that said, the Woven City of Toyota, right? They broke ground this week and they're having at it, right? The other thing is how isolated all of these visions are and how unique they are, but they're also in one place on the globe, right? So this District 2020, if you've tracked any of this in Dubai and this entire city they've built, that is, most of the buildings are power neutral and water neutral. They're generating their own wind power and solar and water generation, and lots of other things. This is built, right? These are built, and there's an expo here, I think, that goes through April of 2022, showcasing live work communities. The challenge is, everybody, I would say, is out of the economic strata of sorts. It's in a certain location with a certain amount of funding and backing and limitless resources of kind of the creation and the storytelling. And that's tough, and that's probably not so real as it scales. And then, this is Mobileye and CES just talking about, the infrastructure of everything that we're collecting, right? A lot of my career has always touched on digital transformation, and I've watched many verticals shift from product to service-based revenue, right? Including IBM. When I was at IBM, we were making printers and laptops and client servers and ATMs, and then we just started experimenting with services, right? By riding around with UPS drivers and sitting in hair salons and doing all these other things, which literally turned into IBM Global Services and took over their revenue, and everybody shifted, right? And they started buying companies like Lotus and software giants. And I think that's the transformation that the automotive world is just actually starting in now. The reality is, this is, I think, Hamburg, Germany, but to watch neighborhood by neighborhood make these transitions, right? To have these conversations, to make the transitions. The interesting thing is they take away the cars in most cases, and it's focused on mass transit, and it's focused on human power and those kind of things. I have a couple personal experiences that have shaped my point of view. One is living in Chicago for 15 years and literally riding transit systems every single day for 15 years, right? From the suburbs, different suburbs, through the city, and then through the city, even through multiple blocks, and it may be 2 or 3 times during the day, and then trying to navigate, right? And you had 3 or 4 different train systems. You had buses, you had taxis, you had scooters, which people would fold up and take on the trains with them. You had skateboards, you had water taxis, you have all these choices, right? And I lived through that and made those decisions on a daily basis. And I look at that, and then I look at the systems today and how these visions are evolving, thinking, boy, okay, it's going to take a really long time to get there, at this kind of vision. But we are affecting neighborhoods, we're affecting small cities, and I think that will scale. It's just going to take a really long time. Wall Street Journal, a long time ago, did a lot of analysis and visual informatics on, where the focus should be. And a lot of it was around transit and walking, right? And biking. And I think, so it's interesting to see, where we're focused today, whether it's on taxis and very shiny, beautiful objects, I'm going to say. And the reality is everything's looking a little more utilitarian that's coming out. Most of the interiors look better than any private jets or first class tickets. So I think about the cost of being able to, scoot even 200 miles in one of these private taxis to some extent, or shuttles. And this is the reality, right? Of we're taking vehicles, we're occasionally inventing something new. Electrification and AV will push. We're retrofitting things onto existing vehicles. And, I think that evolution really takes place. The other experience that I've had, so Chicago and actually traveling a lot in LA and living in New York and big cities, right? I mean, those top 3, when you look at density, population, land mass, and movement, to me are indicative of, if you conquer that, it then scales everywhere else. I think Detroit is, maybe number 24 in that equation, and San Francisco is number 17 in density and scale. So again, I think the big cities, there's multiple tiers and multiple dynamics, and every one of them is going to be different, right? But another experience that I had was working with the Android team from maybe the first month of its inception with Josh Rubin, and all the way through almost like 17 different releases, right? And going through, buttercup, cupcake, donut, eclair, froyo, gingerbread, and watching these changes of the company itself, the dynamics of the market, the product and service ecosystem, where money was exchanged, where data was exchanged, and all these things, right? And honestly, that power of big tech and that experience really shaped my point of view of, what everybody's trying to do today, whether it's a city ecosystem or whether it's vehicle connectivity, whether it's integrated services, all these things, right? And honestly, I think the automotive world plays out very much like the mobile team does, around that maturity, around that footprint, around that extension in the different things and so forth. And reality is, to me, this is where we are today, right? We're heavily focused on the scooters and the electric bikes and still unknown vehicles that come out that are quick city shuttles. With the pandemic, everybody's buying these lower cost personal rides and things like that. And there's a big shift. This, I comedically look a lot at different historical images, and almost this feels like where we are on the right-hand side with 13 screens or 18 screens, in your giant SUVs that can kind of go anywhere, do anywhere. Their living rooms on wheels. Mm-hmm. Even the dog has a screen with a bone. And to, these individual pods, and do we have this efficiency? This is from a French newspaper in the 1920s, right? Of how are we going to move around cities? And John kind of alluded to this dichotomy of, the happiness factor and the individuality and how big is your basket and those kind of things. To me, we're in pretty broad spectrums here still. And then obviously, you add VTOL and other challenges and, the efficiency. I think Hyundai is actually building, right, a drone-based distribution center, but it's, you've got to find where the transit systems interact, and you've got to add, a package delivery element, and you have to add the dispatch for everything else. And literally it's, miles of rework in a city for one system. And it's going to be interesting just to see these evolve or if this city is completely reshape around them or they're retrofitted or what happens, right? Huge barriers, right? Huge things to overcome. This is from, I think, Uber's aerial mobility partner from a year or two ago. And they're still talking about, batteries and propulsion systems and how air traffic works and lots of things. So it's interesting, but the story is there. And then I think, the big decisions that still all the OEMs and the tier ones and even the big tech companies are dealing with, I love SBD kind of simplifies things, is, we sell cars today. Do we want to sell services? What is that going to become? Do we want to build our own ecosystems? Do we, who owns the software platform? And who's disrupting the most, and where's the disruption coming from? So this is kind of an interesting shift in value and shift in roles, and I think is indicative of what we're going to see. And then you've got the municipality side, where whether it's congestion or curbs or rules or regulatory issues, lots of wide open space to continue to explore, and at such an incredible scale, right? So that leads me to kind of where I've landed personally. And I map the conversations I have and the clients I bring in and the people, the things I see happening, but this is, reflective of somebody or something that I'm doing right now actively. And it's been interesting to meet different investors and connect to just a world of people thinking about this that kind of have the luxury of pushing things a little further and to be incubators and to be innovators, which is nice. I go into companies and I actually, talk them into taking a risk of sorts or propose something that is beyond what they've contemplated, or maturing a technology that they think that could go somewhere else, or making a connection for them and saying, this is what we were doing in automotive. This is what the sensors do. This is what the software does. This is what connectivity can bring to your business. And let's explore it. So I'll chat about some of these as we go. But it has been interesting to look at, between investment and product and software design and digital platforms and these things that kind of bridge everything, right? And kind of tie different verticals or different convergence together. My day is interesting because I'm a service designer on Monday. I'm a product designer on Tuesday. I'm a fabricator on Wednesday. I'm a identity designer on Thursday, and I'm a user researcher on Friday. I mean, honest to God. And I probably don't do any of those well, but at least I fake it and I dip my hands into each of them. Common themes, that my career has kind of afforded me to do that because in those transitions, I transitioned from hardware and went into marketing and branding and, hired lots and lots of anthropologists and behavioral psychologists and learned so much from them over the years, and took that into computer software and, brought that all the way back to hardware and ecosystems and connected systems and all those things, right? These days, it's about future movement, future spaces, the contemplation of space and the way we think about space, whether it's a 250 square foot apartment or whether it's, your farm that you want to turn into a resort, right? And you want boondockers and all the van lifers to come stay at your house. How do you do that these days? To just the infrastructure of survival, and it's a unique time, where you can live off grid, you can be relatively self-sufficient if you choose to be. I think with John, the conversation around consumption and lowering consumption, and you mentioned it a couple of times, I think, food, power, waste, disinfecting, connectivity, entertainment, they're all kind of there and available. I mean, you can put them in your backpack and take them with you, basically. And then, again, the reflection of reuse and refurbish and design to repair and, design for disassembly and end of life and these kind of things. And just realizing, I like to say that a lot of the products I'm shopping for or that I'm developing are probably the last one you're ever going to need, right? You're not, with over-the-air updates and component refreshing and, replacement, this and that, I'm starting to think that that's the way everything should be. Everything, sensors are a big part, digital ecosystems. And like I mentioned, it's land use, it's building materials, it's next-gen interaction paradigms. It's been a lot of things. This is how I work, which is pretty typical for probably most of us on the call. I tend to be up here and converging and diverging around spaces and trends and ideation. And then I'm also fortunate to do a lot of software development and physical fabrication and sensor fabrication and creation of, products. So, and then, again, some more common themes. I tend to be more about the emotional and the unique stuff now, more than useful and usable. I like to say, these are the cost of entry, the usability aspects, if it doesn't have value, it's not going to last to people. To the previous conversation, I think inclusive design is just the way we ought to be designing, period. It's not an afterthought. It's not something left later to accommodate certain types of people. It's, it's just accessibility and inclusiveness are just things we should have been doing all along anyway. And they actually turn out to be the best products in my mind. And I tend to, be talking to more novices or people that feel like they're losing their skills, a lot of seniors, or, you might think of the COVID campers as they're talked about these days. I used to work this way and do a lot of facilitation and workshops and post-it notes and all that stuff. And now everything's just on Miro and Slack and Zoom meetings, right? So just like everybody else. Kind of blowing through this stuff. A long time ago, I shifted my thinking of, vehicles. Padmasri Warrior was a person I got to work with at Motorola pretty closely. She was a CTO and going to Neo, it's been interesting to watch a lot of people move from different industries into automotive and mobility, but and reforming the definition of a vehicle. I think most of us are on board with that these days. I do say though, a lot of people, there's a lot of job security if you're in this space and you even want to take it somewhere else. So in this case, screen displays, infotainment, navigation, entertainment, all these domains, they're going to scooters, they're going to bicycles, they're going to all kinds of things. The AV piece and the sensor fusion and augmented reality and heads up displays and all kinds of things like that are also expanding, across the entire vocational truck space, across boating, motorcycles, lots of things with wheels, things that don't have wheels. This demonstration by Caterpillar, I thought, was of a autonomous mining site experiment, and actually full operation, right? They took the guys out of the trucks and put them in the drone controllers for for the vehicles in a room, you know, in warmth, was really spectacular, I thought, at CES this past year. And then the fact that everybody walks around and has a button that could stop the whole operation, right? At a scale of miles. And if you've seen Gold Diggers and, you know, these shows on TV, it's just that. Interesting to me is the ecosystems that are kind of spawning out around all the different vehicle types and new species, I'll call them, right, of things that are around us. And then, you know, even more of the extension. So maybe the AVs are more about taking a nap or taking a trip, or, you know, they're fit for purpose and they're, you know, more activity-based or things like that. This is a really interesting example of some interaction paradigm type stuff I'm doing in physical space, but this is an Alexa with a LiDAR sensor attached to the bottom. So now imagine, you know, you're tracking everything, you know, everything in the house. You can use the algorithms to identify everything, and you're mapping the voice and the movement, you know, and the intent and everything there. So it's really interesting just to see where everything expands, and the possibilities here. You know, in this space, and it's the scale of increase. So I mentioned I spent some time with boats and seeing boats that autonomously park themselves, that look at, you know, the current and the swells and the wind and the mass, and, you know, 1 to 4 engines with complex propellers, and they keep you perfectly still and they keep you perfectly in control. And you've got maybe a joystick and you just completely maneuver these things, right? And the complexity of that system and behavior is just overwhelming, right? And to me, I think, you know, there's a lot of learning in each of those spaces that's going to come through. This, I think, is what we're seeing just a lot of right now. This is Bollinger and these platforms. What's interesting is when you start to think about the ecosystem and the accessories and what they call the apparatus. So everything's being attached. And you start, you know, we started with connectivity and with app integration, but now it's about the number of parcels on the back of your truck, or how much water is in the tank of the fire truck, or, you know, the articulation of the arm, and when it's placed in a certain way, how does it affect, you know, the balance and the lateral positioning of the vehicle? And what if the vehicle's sideways on a hill? What if the vehicle's, you know, in a fire and needs to get out of the fire, you know, and is surrounded by fire, those kind of things. But likewise, you know, this space is interesting. And I think most OEMs have been in this space, and vehicle developers have been in this space of a few platforms and what they evolve to. The interesting thing now is, you know, the commitment to invest this way, think this way, and build this way. And then also, though, I think the Alibabas of the world, the Foxcons of the world, and the scale of which they can build and offer things, right? Magna, and basically offer you something that, you know, has flexibility of drivetrain and batteries and motors and steering and braking, suspension, transmission, everything, right? And another pivotal experience of mine was probably in about 2015 in a trip to Germany, in Aachen, Germany. And I was standing in a warehouse of a startup, and the startup had e-bikes, they had 3-wheelers, they had 4-wheelers for, you know, mobile short distance transit and delivery. They had the future of the postal system for Germany, trucks, you know, delivery trucks, class, I don't know what class it was, but, and they had a people mover, you know, like a 4-person shuttle that was autonomous. And the group hadn't been around for more than a couple of months. They only had a couple employees, and you could ride every one of these things. So I literally got in them and I drove down the street and, you know, took off in the rain and experienced it all, and, you know, looked at the commonality of the platform and the battery set and the skateboards and everything else. And you just realized, wow, everything's going to change. And that company, it was eGo, it's e.go. And, you know, they've had their ups and downs, and I think they have one production facility in Germany, and they just big investors in the Netherlands. Likewise, Canoe, I've always been impressed with these guys, and as much about the platform and what they're going to do, but also on the availability. So if you're buying a vehicle that also has a subscription model business and template built into it, like how is that going to change everything, right? And in the future, am I going to, if I buy a GM or a Zoox car, is it going to be, is Zoox and Rivian going to be connected to Amazon in some way that, there's a business opportunity? Or, GM trucks in the future that I buy, I, have revenue generation with FedEx as an option, or whatever the case is, right? I think these business models all mash, and that's quite interesting. Reality is this is where we are today around these platforms and the execution and how they're used and thought through. I mentioned the fire trucks. I think the emergency vehicle space is quite interesting, again, because of the apparatus and the gear and how relevant bushfires and forest fires and wildfires are these days, and the conditions and the way they're using sensors and maneuvering. So back to John's thoughts, and I need to pick up the pace here even, or maybe skip a bunch.
No, you're good.
The case of humanity is interesting, just around, I jump in and out of so much in the digital world that, I change these topics and my whole landscape and my sphere changes, right? And I like to say my existence is geofenced by a handful of algorithms, right? So the content that's coming at me, the A/B testing that's being pushed on me by, different companies, and just the digital nature of kind of money-making, aggression, eyeballs, fake popularity, all these things, right? And how it's changing everything. I push back pretty hard on this, and I use the outdoors to do it, which is interesting to me. Being in this space where you're, maybe pushing digital technologies and sensors into the outdoors, should we be turning everything off and only using specifically what's needed to survive, right? So I maybe need power, I maybe need navigation, but when I launch, an outdoor hiking app, should I be, instead of asking permission, as the apps do today, should I be turning off social media, or can I be, activating do not disturb type functions and things like that? And that's kind of an interesting juxtaposition I'm in pretty deep right now, but it's a symptom of all these things, right? At Motorola, we used to say, when did we start spending more time organizing our friends than making friends? And I think now we spend more time screening calls than having calls, right? We spend more time dumping our trash email than we do our spam email than we do actually answering real email, or the numbers are disproportionate. So to me, these are pretty pivotal things. And I paid a lot of attention in the early days and to the behavioral science world in Stanford and BJ Fogg and this, methodology called captology, and how they were starting to capture people's attention. And this is back in the, early 2000s when that lab was evolving. And it was interesting, but, at some point designers made very conscientious decisions, right? About endless feeds and about, the bait and switch and about continuous A/B loops and those kind of things, to the point where now it's obviously changed our mindset. It's changed our behaviors, not mine, but large parts of the population. So that's kind of a constant thing that exists. And to me, this comes back to some of the conversation that you were having with John as well around, how we're so tech driven in our innovation versus, spending more time on connecting beings, right? Or connecting with the physical world, or connecting with each other. And maybe the measurement of a good vehicle ought to be its contribution to community, or the effect it has on a culture, than, whether it's got 23 features of driver assistance. We're kind of stuck in this crazy loop right now, I think. And that's been a symptom of people and the way consumers purchase things, you know, this desire to have always the latest and greatest and thinking I'm going to use it like a hot tub, right? And the reality is, you know, I think we've quantified that you're using maybe 40% of what a car can do. And reality is you don't even know what the rest of these things are, right? So that's always been quite challenging to me, and a huge imbalance of investment and R&D and you know, supply chain and everything else. So things like this really get me excited when it's like a battery and it's coming back to this raw creation, and this is your way of moving, and it's got so much diversity. I think Cake is a really cool company. Interesting for me, so taking a step into the outdoor world, where this hit me the hardest was literally just starting to go events and going to the outdoor retailer show in Colorado, and I'm a product junkie, so I love it, but just walking in there and seeing Rivian and Mercedes transit vans and AR and VR and all these things, you know, and the accessories, and realizing, wow, okay, we're all doing the same thing. And, you know, these companies that call themselves mobile adventure gear, you know, things with wheels. I grew up making skateboards, you know, in my basement and in the wood shop of the high school. But it was just really interesting. And they were the nicest people and the most conscientious companies, so many of them that I was bumping into, whether it was like Patagonia or National Geographics or this company in the left, Sylvan Sport, turns out to be owned and operated by a guy that I went to industrial design school with, and we were really close friends. And so I was making these also personal connections as I was walking around and closing the loop on things. Interestingly, they had an experience day. Everything is built around the experiences. You go to the rivers, you go to the lakes, you make your own food and energy bars, you know, you shoot Sasquatch with bear repellent. And you're outside with all these people. Behind these photos was actually every e-bike you could ever imagine and every shoe you could ever imagine in gear. You would like gear yourself up and go ride all over. And that was just fantastic, right? And then I started going to the pitch events, and it was just interesting. Again, you know, this one was support for multiple years of female founded companies and startups, and the investment community and the scale of it and what they were making, and how it was this real balance of like nature and humanity and culture, right? Versus being tech driven all the time. That said, you know, so the convergence is where I kind of came back and I looked at these scale of industries and had started meeting so many people that all of that was opportunities, and I started throwing out provocations. So what if you didn't, you know, you had one system and that system moved with you, again, in your backpack or you know, in a tiny house that's on the road or the mountains or the water. And I threw a lot of these provocations out and then started talking to different companies and realizing the connection to mobility was, you know, the e-chassis that the RV guys are using, or, you know, the pontoon propulsion systems that are electric, or, you know, the way they were thinking about furniture in the interior and mobility and, you know, kitchens that are part of the vehicle and stuff like that. A couple of companies I started working with, one is called No Dirty Earth, and they do water, and it's the elimination of that single-use plastic bottle that you were talking about earlier. And then even a three-wheel company for paraplegics where, you know, you can go outside and it's like a mountain bike in its articulation. And then interestingly, how these things come together, right? And the companies are related. And then we started getting into prefab materials. The RV industry is so huge and interesting in the Midwest. It's, but they're also very creative and have a lot of knowledge and expertise around, you know, this fabrication and this flexibility and the future of housing. So yeah, it was interesting to meet these people and then see these things in production. So this is a company, I think it's called Ecolab or Eco Capsule. And, you know, they're building these capsules and they're doing 50, 60 at a time. they're transported by helicopter, they're enhancements to your physical property, they're pods that you're putting on different properties. They're totally wind and solar sustained. And then obviously the ideation, you know, in the creative world is doing quite a bit of this world, this ideation, students in particular. Students and companies. And what I've done here is I'm not telling you which are my projects, they're just kind of blended in. So there's a lot of interesting things again around pods and movement and, you know, and AV transport in that future. I mentioned the subscription model for Canoe in particular. I think this is the key to EV exposure and growth, you know, around no commitment, around the roll up of road hazard and insurance and gas cards and all these things. You know, this level of convenience at a very affordable price will be interesting. I think I remember Dave Muro on one of these talks talking about that and different elements. And then interestingly, where will the city evolve, right? So will the city be this very curated, layered, coordinated thing, or will it be user generated, right? Will it be a lot of these people with pods going to parking lots and, you know, putting a project team on the third floor, right? At Ford, I used to have to travel a couple of times to the Lord and Taylor at the Fairlane Mall to have meetings. And we'd have meetings in the food court, right? And it felt kind of like that, right? And people were just displaced because they were knocking down buildings and moving people around. But to me, that lifestyle now and that flexibility and modularity is actually here if you choose to live this way. This is a company called Kibo, which, you know, significant investment, significant membership. They're buying property and they're building these destinations, right? All over the world. Actually all over the country in the US right now. And they're the Google Sidewalks guys, you know, and some affiliation to that, but they see everything as electric, as autonomous, as distributed, you know, as shared and as user generated. So the stuff that you own that's not in your vehicle might be at their locations that you need. So you share kitchens, you share business areas, you share workout space, you share gear for outdoor activity. Lastly, is, you know, this personal service that I've been incubating and will pilot in the spring, still coordinating different suppliers and assets and things like that. But it's basically built around the kind of democratization of access to the outdoors. So, you know, lots of people are shifting a mindset of experiences versus, you know, physical ownership, and are really embracing, you know, instantaneous access to things, obviously. And I think there's you know, the question is, how can we, without the ownership of the gear, without the ownership of an SUV, you know, how can we facilitate these kind of destinations and these trips? And obviously with COVID, we're seeing a lot of this in isolation right now. And we're seeing it a lot, you know, at very high levels of investments. Everybody moving to Montana and Utah and Idaho and buying, you know, camper vans and those kind of things. So that said, you know, again, this drive of the natural world and the source of intellectual interest, again, I think John was talking a lot about this, you know, is what makes it worth chasing. It'll be interesting to see what and if we can pull off. And I always say you're always going to have one concentric circle new experience when you're on these trips. And there's lots of gear and exposure. And this is a kit for going in the outdoors. It's a startup right now. But you could imagine also, if you want to learn about electrification, you know, you have an electrified weekend. If you want to contribute to, you know, helping out with a communal farm or a food desert, or you want to, you know, learn something more about astronomy, or you want to help a town that needs a new water source, right? The Texas stuff was interesting when the power went down and the water was bad. You know, these kind of things are all easy plug and play type solutions. So so that's it, you know, and we'll see how that goes. And I've gotten a lot of good interest, and I've got a handful of different people. I'm going to pilot it in Michigan, which isn't so realistic, but then to go to Chicago, and it's probably more geared for big cities. But
what was the slide about the hats? The one before this.
oh yeah, you know, it's again the exposure, you know, just the way people are talking about this, and the way some of the products that I'm including. This is a fully biodegradable barbecue. The gear is just interesting and fascinating. And of course, to me as an industrial designer, you know, whether it's apparel or power or sporting gear, or, you know, I think one of the top things people are carrying around right now in the back of their truck is a hammock, right? Portable hammocks. Yeah. The hats are interesting. I love, you know, even the scientific way of things being broken down. So, you know, are you a motivator, or are you the camper or the big bull? You know, there's just the evolution of these things. And again, most of it goes back to, you know, again, it's a reuse and recovery and things like that. And so we'll see. And I think all of that circles back to, you know, again, the slowing down, maybe not being all about efficiency and productivity, and more about discovering myself and connecting with others and connecting with nature, and maybe resetting my life a little bit, which I think COVID has already done. But I think continuing the means and the infrastructure to do these kind of things is important.
Awesome. First of all,
that's the story.
That was beautiful. Means you are always having fun. These are some areas where it's not just the intersection of outdoors and how you are going to poop, but the intersection of fun and the mobility and the gear that you're mentioning, of how we are going to aid more of our experiential lifestyles, because it's no matter what, it's not the product, it's not the services, it's the experiential economy we are in, the aspirations, the emotional one and the experiential one. It seems like you have found a pretty nice place to go and evolve, I would say, your role. That quote from David Attenborough, that was really amazing. It's again nicely kind of an, I would say, extension of not just what we are going to use as a mobility. It's not just from A to B. It's not as just functional as that, as people always call transportation with that. It is about not just moving in style, but making sure you are here, your life is worthy because of the passions you have, the fun you have. Yeah, you have to work also, but then at the end, how do you devise the similar vehicle as a vehicle for the excitement and fun you want to draw out? That's beautiful. I think I like the narrative you painted from way before, what's evolving, what the AI is doing, like the newer cities kind of a charter, which makes sure it like the Kibo, during the slides of Kibo, you mentioned about electrical, autonomous, reusable, shareable,
human-centered,
and inclusive. I think those are these things were, I think, were always on, I would say, not top of the mind, but top of the mind. But because of what happened last year, people have seen the increasing velocity of people's adoption propensity for going for this specific, very focused, clearly passionate points. And I think that's where the market is eventually also going to follow, not the entire big mega production market, but how to be specific, how to be polarized. Means not everybody will love the idea of buying that outdoor kit for relieving yourself in the campground. But you're a camper, if you're over there, you might come there in Aston Martin, but you're going to finally go and enjoy, I would say, the ruggedness of rustic camping.
Yeah, there'll be a big push. You'll see in the outdoor retailer space, and you know, so there's a company called Hip Camp, and there's another one called Tentrr, Tentrr, and these guys are enabling you to turn any piece of land into a resort or a destination, right? And they're heavily used already. So you can take your farm and, you know, you can build a platform, and they'll bring the tents and set everything up. And, you know, and these places are sold out right now. They've been sold out. There's pipelines of demand. And again, you know, what's causing that? How does that infrastructure sustain over time? How does it grow? You know, how does it find its way into the cities? There's just lots of dynamics there that'll be quite interesting.
Well, I know we have plenty of questions. I have plenty of questions by the way. I'm just writing the notes here. We will try to answer some of them before we'll have to move further. But in your earlier slides, maybe the one-fourth of the first part of your presentation, you said companies now should try to think about managing the ecosystem. It is not just about your product, but trying to manage over there. So how do you think means companies, let's say, who would be in an ecosystem, start to get together and talking with each other anyway? Where a product OEM and a vehicle OEM and a city person and a couple of different, let's say, electronic gadgets, what would be the forum for them to come together? How do you get them to talk with each other? Because everybody comes
Yeah.
with idea, IP, and guarding it, and then, oh my God, it's going to cause some friction over there because nobody has that vision for an unified, singular kind of an ecosystem.
Yeah, it was interesting as a consultant in Chicago. You know, maybe it was in the first decade of 2000, I was working with the Regional Transportation Authority, the Chicago RTA, and you know they had the trains and the buses and significant influence with taxis and some other things. This is pre-Uber and Lyft. It was really challenging, right? I mean, between the budgets, the board approval, the municipality agreements, and the the neighborhood politics, everything, and then the agendas that lived across it. The better model that I see today actually is these incubations that are multiple corporate co-ops or cohorts, the word, right? And there's a handful of them. They're doing it really well in Pittsburgh in particular, I think. And you've got, a tier one and tier two, a mass transit company, a municipality, a tech firm, and they together are going after something, right? And even in the scale of the companies, the mobility worlds that I was showing, in this District 20, I mean, this is maybe 12 to 15 different companies coming together to build an entire city and learn and layer with mutual investment. And it's again, the mix of the companies that I mentioned, right? Including business consultants and tech companies and mobility tier, different fabrication companies and builders and that kind of stuff. That seems to get things done much more than what I think is just very challenging going through politics and competitors putting their guard down and agreeing to collaborate for the betterment of the city. I don't see that happening, honestly.
The slide that you have, that city of Dubai or outside of it, means it's pretty interesting. I was there a few years earlier for the pre-runner of that, and I read a book. I think it was just the book's name was just Dubai, but I will try to find the name of the author. There they talk about the strategy or the foresight of their Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum.
Right.
Read that book. The way they think about the future means they have depleted their sources of oil, so they have to keep on regenerating newer elements, and the way and it's autocratic government, but even then they try to make sure they get the partners or talk with each other. It's at a complete unbelievable level. I think there are a couple of questions from the audience. I know we are going over the time, but Pat, hopefully you can bear some time. Let's go over there. But before that, you mentioned about, you just quickly mentioned about the social dilemma, Netflix kind of and thing about, looks like we all are forced into this geo-fenced of things that will serve only the things that we are exposed to. And that I think is kind of an starting of a disease because we are no more exposed in a way on what might be the other interesting, exciting, vibrant things around versus we are pigeonholed into that. So that's a pretty scary thought also from some perspectives, but nicely you identified that to see how we can still, in using these vehicles, escape that kind of a bubble. Let me go back to some of the questions.
There's a big social push. I mentioned the Stanford behavioral sciences team. Right now, people are really distancing themselves from that type of thinking, and obviously the social dilemma and a couple other recent publications are really bringing all that to light about how predatory it is, how it's replacing our self-awareness and our self-fulfillment and those kind of things. And, you have to consciously I think that's almost a layer of, I don't know what it is, if it's education or parenthood or tool development or all those things. But realizing that that's there and having the conversation with your friends and family and community is important, right?
It is really, really important. Let me go with at least some of the questions from the audience. One from Dennis Atkinson. Can Parrish mention the concept of an electrified weekend, more into the buying or the thought of buying electrical vehicles? Concept.
So the practice of it, in the mindset of it, and those kind of things. I think that's interesting. It's the wave of COVID. And it's not so well articulated, but I'm going to say, there's an overwhelming interest. And it literally just might be the reduction of CO2 in the blue skies. And, there's something happening in my psyche that's causing me to be more conscientious about these things, right? That said, Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, these guys that have been doing it for so long and have been thinking about regenerative power, from water, and have committed to the incentives for such a long time, and now it's made an impact to their community. I think that's critical. I think it's nice to see everybody saying we're going to be net zero, by 2030 and by 2040, and whether you're GM or the UK, I mean, everybody's got a different number, right? One thing that always comes to mind, I heard this mentioned not too long ago, was the phrase, info is the oil of the 21st century and data and analytics is the combustion engine, right? I think it was Paul Sundberg-Ferar. And now, combustion engines are bad. And I'm guessing the analytics and the algorithm and the AI, if we don't control it, is also going to be perceived as bad at some point. So what's the reciprocal of that and where does it go? I think, the tough thing with electrification is price points, with incentives coming back, and really infrastructure. So, I think in the US, there's 67 EVs to every charger, something like that. Where in Norway, there's 2, in China, there's like 5, right? I mean, the numbers, there's a couple charts that show these real huge differences of investment and efficiency. And, you watch these people that are buying all these vehicles and it's challenging to, cross the country. One thing for me in the pandemic is I've had to drive across country multiple times, to take care of parents or to do different experiments or to just be somewhere for some reason. And that to me still strikes me as, I can't do that probably, or I'd have to allocate so much more time in an EV right now.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to continue. I think electrification in general is just a big realization, and solar's obviously been always on the lift, but now this kind of self-sustaining and this off the grid, and Texas and lots of other factors are all going to contribute. Hopefully it can be experimental. I do think these vehicles that are going to be available on demand with no overhead are going to be the try before you buy experience, just as Turo has been for so many people. And these services are going to be the key as well. I mentioned Canoe because I think their model is really attractive of just, why not try this vehicle for a month? Why not try this other vehicle for a month? 6 months, all that stuff.
Based on that statement, we have another question from an attendee, Zach Bolton. He's asking, what's your perspective about, no, that's a different question, sorry. Let's go back to Zach's question. Let's try to go and continue with the plane of thought you had. He's talking about, Jan Michael, she's asking, what are your thoughts on why all of the plenty automotive subscription models that got tested so far are failing? And right now we are trying to see how Canoe can make business with this subscription-based model. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think, again, it was really incredible over the last couple of years. I wrote a paper about this. It's on my Motourly site, and what's missing in subscription models. But But I said, okay, this experiential try before you buy thing is probably coming, right? And this is going to make the difference. But that said, you know, they also were for 6 months or they were for a year. And, you know, it was luxury car buyers. It wasn't, you know, there was, I think Ford had Canvas and some others that came and went, but they weren't so widely publicized. And maybe they weren't even like the only way you can buy a vehicle, right? So in the future, I think we see fractional ownership, we see subscription models, we see memberships, we see all these things. And that viability is a reflection of, you know, the current times and the current degree, you know, embrace of access and non-ownership and flexibility. You know, and it's really different, again, in these city sizes, right? If you're afraid of mass transit and you're buying a $4,000 vehicle, you know, that's electric and you travel these distances, you know, that makes sense, versus the suburbs and, you know, regional cities. Yeah, we'll see. It's yeah, a lot of variability. The subscription guys, they tried everything, which was really interesting to me. Some of the more interesting things were, you know, when Turo realized that 87% of people that rented a Jeep were buying a Jeep, you know, 2 weeks later or something like that. So it was like, in the data, there was a lot of understanding and awareness.
Kind of the halo effect also that earlier OEMs used to use. You step in to buy, let's say, to buy or see a nice latest GT or a Mustang, but eventually you come out of the dealership buying a Focus or something else. So
right.
Sometimes some things are done basically for the attraction, for making them at least taste your brand experience or taste your brand promise. But as you said, then eventually the actual bread making money comes from something else. But you still have the first. You're reducing, coming back to what John was saying, if that is the barrier of people not even tasting your experience, this reduces one barrier, one step to go. I can at least try it for a month. If it doesn't, that doesn't, but at least the exposure is there.
Plus, I don't have to pay insurance. Plus, I have road hazard insurance. Plus, I've got a fuel, you know, card with it. You know, these other conveniences, how do they outweigh, and or do I put value on them against all these other things, you know,
it
going
goes
on?
back to the newer elements of when we say ecosystem is not just a company putting something in the ecosystem, but how you think and anticipate about the needs of the other problems from the ecosystem, I would say partners, and in providing those tentacles already in your elements. So in your business should not be based on just one product, it will be a portfolio of products. And again, the same way, it will be the portfolio of service offerings. One of them might be subscription. I know we are a little bit over time, but I still want to make justice to at least one, if not more.
You're running the show, so.
Yeah, no. Pat, just hold on over there. Parrish, let's try to answer one question, and then we will transfer to the next person. The question was from Zach Bolton about your perspective about you mentioned reusability and serviceability or repair for life, but how that fits to the needs of our evolving family. A bachelor, then you're courting your spouse, then married, then kids, then empty nester. How does that correlate with design for life?
Yeah, wow, interesting.
And I said you need to answer it quickly. Let's see how you can.
Yeah, no, I think the platform issue is the key, and you know, I think the dynamic of the relationship of you to a brand has got to shift, where these brands that do commit to this life cycle and reuse and refurbishing and recycling and reaccess and you know and dynamic access. It's Patagonia is interesting because they built a site with used clothing right from your neighborhood, and you can. I think there's a commercial that's out there now, but it's, you know, do I feel okay wearing somebody else's vehicle, right? Does the future of a GM dealership allow me to trade cars with my neighbor, you know, when they're empty nesters and they're getting rid of their minivan and I've got 4 kids that are young and I'm schlepping everybody around, you know? So whether it's these fractional ownership or ease of trading and distribution, and a lot of this to me is digital transformation and access. And if there's a finite amount of things built, there will be fewer vehicles. There will be fewer vehicles per household, you know, post-pandemic, that'll continue, I think. But, you know, if the ecosystem shifts or the community shifts or the way a company thinks about it, somebody like Canoe, I think, is probably thinking about that, where, you know, it's one platform, but it's, or two platforms, but it's all these different form factors. And, you know, can I just literally drive in and have the body extracted and put another pod on the platform that, you know, now is fit for purpose for my business and my growing family, right? I mean,
yeah, it's some things would have to be tested out a little bit for a little bit longer amount.
But it's a huge leap. You know, I still watch the mobile phone guys. They want you to buy a new phone every 6 months. And reality is, you know, you keep them for years. And same with the automotives. They want you to buy a new car every year. And we keep our cars for what, 11 years now on average or something like that or more. So
I know there are so many things that I would want to ask based on my notes, but I think we have to be respectful of the time here.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do any follow-up. Anybody wants to reach out.
We will certainly catch up. I will make sure I will call you sometime, if not today, tomorrow.
Appreciate the venue. Sure.
No, this was great. I enjoyed the arc of your storytelling, and eventually how you are finding your kind of, and I would say, passion points in the world of outdoors, but still on the cross section of mobility as such. So thank you again.